possibly my favorite quote of all time from my icon and role model personally. That's Arsene Wenger's eternal quip that if you don't believe you can do it, then you have no chance at all. And that, of course, applies to almost every situation in life. The next thing that we have to talk about, and probably the last big section, is the journey beyond the CAT, of course. What do you do after the CAT? Well, if you have a great score, or if you're anticipating a great score, I think it's pretty clear what you need to do. You need to start preparing for interviews. You need to start putting together who you are, where you come from, what your interests are, and so on and so forth, answers that you may be asked in the future. And of course, you need to be reading the newspaper and so on and so forth. But what happens if you're not doing too well on the CAT, or maybe if you need to maximize your options? Then I think it makes sense to focus on the other possibilities. For example, the GMAT, the GRE, or the other exams in the Indian B school space like IIFT, SNAP, ZAT, and others. And I think that's valuable because you do want to focus on all your options. Apart from the CAT, what do you do when you're done with the CAT? Maybe this is your nth attempt. Let's say n equals 1 for someone who's new, n equals 2, 3, so on for someone who's not. And you want to figure out whether the n is now too much, whether there ought to be an n plus 1, whether the next year in June you really want to start taking mocks again, whether it's not. So what are the signs that you should stop right there and that your n is enough? I think there's no one-shot explanation for everyone, but I think you yourself need to evaluate your life goals and whether this is the only way to achieve them. I think a lot of times people make the mistake of assuming that this is the only way to achieve them, because there are a lot of people making very successful careers in different parts of the economy, not just in the managerial roles that are available. Maybe they could be doing something in engineering, maybe they could be doing something in the arts, or they could be pursuing management education outside. And that's something, if you have the firepower, if you have the financial capabilities, you really want to explore that rather than putting undue effort into this one thing. For me, the thing that made me stop was that I had done enough, I had prepared enough, there was nothing more that I could do. And I felt there was something more I could do in my first CAT attempt because I had not prepared very well. In the second CAT attempt, I felt maybe my temperament could be better, maybe my management of time could be better. And therefore, I thought a third CAT attempt was warranted, and I did end up taking it. And if I had not done well in the third attempt, which I luckily did, I think I would have sort of given up and decided to go with whatever B school I would have gotten at that point. And I should say that failure is a part of this journey as well, right? So in my second attempt, I had calls from MDI, FMS, IIT Bombay, NEET, etc. And if I had gotten into any one of them, maybe I would not have taken the CAT a third time. So you also want to balance the ambition that you have with the awareness that you have about what you want to do, when you want to do it, or by when you want to do it, because you want to be at a certain place at a certain age, right? You don't want to be doing things that others are doing at 22 when you're 35. You should judge your own reasons. You should factor in all the variables, how easy it is, whether your goals are accomplished by taking the CAT again. Try to think about your goals as well. Are they well defined? Are they linked to the CAT in particular, or could they be achieved somehow in some other way? And finally, I want to give you some advice about the long term. In the long term, we're all dead. So that long term doesn't matter. The medium long term, if you took what the CAT taught you, you should be doing well eventually. If you learned focus, discipline, persistence, consistency, if you learn to increase how good you are at something every single day by some small number, that should compound and you should eventually be doing well. But then in the medium long term, you also have figured out some things that you're good at and some things that you're not. So suppose the CAT turns out to be a dead end. Suppose you don't make it in. Now you have your profile, you have your skills, you have something of a LRDI table where you can put in things that you're good at, things that you've tried, and then you can keep eliminating them when time goes by. So of course the medium long term might not be 2 years, it might be probably 10 years, 15 years, and so on. So if you really discover what options have been cancelled out, then you can go ahead and start thinking about the options which are still left and maybe pursue some of them with the lessons you've learned from all the options that did get cancelled out. And then you'll figure out something that really, really works for you and works for you in a way that you can be good at it, you can be happy about doing it, you can contribute to others in some way in doing that. And I think that's where you'll really find a clearer path to doing what you should be doing. And I think that's the story of the medium term. But then what about the immediate future? So I have a theory about identity. Let's call it the theory of identity. And the theory is that you choose to define yourself a certain way for a certain time among a certain crowd while chasing a certain objective. That's one postulate. The other postulate is that human beings chase a growth curve. We always want to go up and to the right. We never want to go back. We never want to go left because our minds are structured that way. And the final postulate is that a new identity requires willful or intentional immersion in its activities, peoples, and tenets. So what does this mean? Well, we'll just go back to what I said earlier. The first postulate, you choose to define yourself a certain way for a certain time among a certain crowd while chasing a certain objective. So you, my friend, have chosen to define yourself as a CAT aspirant while pursuing the CAT, being among this entire cohort and chasing a B school admit to some of the top B schools in this country. That's just one identity that you have, and an identity that because you have willfully immersed in its activities is quite strong at this point. Now, as soon as the growth curve on this begins to flatten, or maybe worse, it begins to turn back or turn down, we begin to fret. We begin to worry a lot. And this is why if you have one bad mock score, you're starting to worry about your entire thesis, about whether you're good enough, whether this is the exam for you. And that's why these things matter. But my theory of identity says that you want to then immerse yourself in another identity that you build up in the meanwhile. If you can find a way to jump from the dying growth curve of one identity or one pursuit to the early stage. So the early stage would be somewhere here, whereas you are right now here and it may be turning down. So if you can jump back to a different identity or jump onwards to a different identity where the growth curve is still starting, then you can actually go up this curve, feel happy for a while, feel stable, and then sort of jump back to the CAT, maybe 6 months later when you go for the N+1 attempt. But you need to do that because if you're stuck here, you're not going to be happy, you're going to be dissatisfied with whatever you're doing, you may not even be good company for your friends and your family, and that's going to be troublesome for you. So you may have some anxiety of being part of this crowd because there are too many people watching your performance. If you're thinking about how many people will know that you failed if you don't make it in, these are triggers and you should figure them out when you see them. Immediately after the CAT is the best chance to sort of attach yourself to a new identity. We can and do juggle many different identities across our lives in parallel. So it's not new to you what I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting you do it more intentionally, more willfully, and be more aware of what that is and what that will give you. So for me, for example, my identities are that I'm an Arsenal fan, a football fan, a player of football, a gym freak. Maybe I'm not, but maybe someone is. A wannabe musician, which everybody is at some point. A guy trying to learn to code. So you are someone and you have different identities and you want to engage in them. If you want to engage in being a football fan, maybe engage a lot more on Twitter. Maybe it will help you get out of the identity of being a CAT aspirant. And I think that's pivotal because that's something that will allow you to go back to a different growth curve and maybe pursue that. And that's why I think you want to really, in the immediate future, you want to understand the fact that the CAT and all the pain that's coming to you from it or all the adulation that's coming to you from it, it's just one identity and you will eventually have to move on to another. People who are successful will move on to the identity of a B school aspirant very soon. People who are not would want to move on to something else rather than be ensnared by the CAT's sort of sneaky arms in the distance between one CAT attempt and another. And in the meanwhile, of course, you want to think about whether the N+1 attempt makes sense for you or not. The idea was to tell you that you don't have to think about it in a very short-term perspective, but you can think about your life as a whole in a slightly longer-term perspective, not just to do with the CAT itself, maybe not one CAT, maybe multiple CATs, like us, people who took multiple CATs to get in. And if not the CAT, then of course, many other things that open up to you after you gather the experiences and get through this journey where you get all your learnings and understand more about yourself, what drives you, and so on. Finally, I'd like to leave you with two things. One is possibly my favorite quote of all time from my icon and role model personally. That's Arsene Wenger's eternal quip that if you don't believe you can do it, then you have no chance at all. And that, of course, applies to almost every situation in life. And the second idea is a little bit of philosophy from the Gita, the idea of doing what you need to do without worrying about the fruits of your penance or your hard work. And I think that's what you need to be doing, because if you're worried too much about what's going to come off these things, then you're going to be putting too much pressure on yourself. And all the very best to you. I hope you do well, and I hope you learn something in this process about yourself and about where you should be going. So, hey, all the best on this journey.